of the first things we look for when a baby is born is to hear her voice, her declaration of arrival, that I'm here and you people are never going to get another night of sleep again. As the child grows, we encourage her to stand up for herself, to use her voice and act with intention. Say what you mean and mean what you say. It really surprises no one who knows me well to read in my kindergarten report card that I was very effective in using my voice to organize and direct cleanup time. According to the teacher, my next step was to actually participate in cleanup. What she had missed, to my recollection, was my determination that cleanup needed to be fair and efficient, and at 5 years old, we needed some serious coordination. As educators, we often speak of how much we value voice in children. It's in the stories we read, in the posters we hang, in the lessons we teach, and the advice we give. In theory, we love voice, and we know, or should know anyway, that children have voice. They don't need us to give it to them, only to make space for it. But for all our talk of voice, we also message something else, something that is intended for some learners over others, something that stands in opposition to our supposed love of voice: silence. It is used with those whose very presence, whose truth, whose voice we find challenging or uncomfortable, to us and to the structures that we uphold. Now, you might think that this silence hits like a hammer, that it's somehow loud and overt. And so you might think that silence found me in the questions of my classmates of how we came to be in Canada and if it wasn't on Camelback. You might think that silence found me in the period 2 history teacher's explanation of the many disadvantages of being an immigrant. You might think it found me in the chemistry professor's suggestion that really young Arab women don't need to bother with organic chemistry. When would we ever use it? In each of these moments, who you are and how you're perceived are visibly displayed. Yet somehow that visibility makes it possible to engage with the intended impact, to construct a response. So, no, camels don't swim across oceans. And really, I would love to hear your European family's immigration story. And it's okay, I'll ask the TA my questions after class. Even when these are not said out loud, the truth is I never really did address my history teacher's bigotry, but just knowing what I would have liked to say, seeing it clearly in my own head, strengthened my sense of self. So despite frustration or hurt, there was this renewed commitment to speak out, to use my voice. And that's the funny thing about silence, though. If you make it through childhood and the nausea-inducing roller coaster ride of adolescence with your voice somewhat intact, you actually come to believe that you're immune to silence as an adult. But silence, it finds you. It travels the length of rooms, crawling up around you, squeezing, leaving you empty of word, hiding your experiences in the darkest corners of yourself. When silence found me, I didn't even know that it had moved in. It had colonized my very being. It had colonized my tongue. But where did silence find me? In so many places. It found me in the comments that I was somehow overqualified to teach, of needing to tone it down. In the constant expectation that my face needed to look more friendly, smile even when it was saying nothing at all. It found me in a class that I was so excited to take that I was the only one sitting outside registration at dawn, because in those days you needed to do these things in person. I had met the instructor a year before at a conference and was instantly enamored. She was brilliant, dynamic, outspoken. She put into words ideas and feelings that I had that whirled around my head about women's rights and health that made me want to jump up like I was at a boy band concert, but I don't know anything about that. From the first day of class, all I wanted was to be seen, to connect. I read every chapter, every article, tried to participate in every discussion. I brought all of myself, and my growing understanding of human rights into that space. I was one of the youngest students, the only woman of color, and the only recent immigrant. The first time the teacher was impatient with me, I figured time was a factor. She needed to move on with the lesson. But after being continually cut off, attempts to participate in conversations dismissed, and written work empty of feedback, I knew it was me. I was the factor. Still, I showed up for class. I did every reading, every assignment. I was a little more quiet, and my eagerness a little more tempered. Eye rolls and loud sighs coming at me unexpectedly for having committed the crime of being present, for speaking an unwelcome truth, for using my voice. I don't know what it is that I said, only the sound of my heart, thunder loud, and the lump, you know, the one that sits about here holding back the tears of your shame. Breathe, you tell yourself. In, out. You wait for the end of class and you gather your belongings and pieces of yourself. You never go back. You drop the class, convincing yourself it wasn't meant for you. You clearly are not smart enough, knowledgeable enough, speak well enough to be in such a space. Your silence culminates in your total absence. You forget about the class and the teacher. You tell yourself, next time, speak less. Don't be so present. Don't share as much. You tell yourself, these are good life lessons. Do you hear pieces of your own story in this? How many of you have silence scars that come from experiences like this one, or harsher ones even? Do you remember when silence wrapped itself around your body? I mention this story not because it was the first or the last or even the worst of the silence scars. It just kept coming back to me because it was so subtle, yet absolute. It centered an educator with the power of her position, of her identity, of her status in my eyes. It amazes me after all this time, the shame of that experience, the need to shrink, to be small, to be quiet, lies just beneath the surface. The changes that came from this and other silence scars, the hiding of my passion, the revealing less of myself, essentially the guarding of my voice and using it very selectively in professional interactions, disappeared in what came to be my relationship with my students at school and my own children at home. There, I insisted on space for voice. I used my voice. I made sure that the children at home and at school saw themselves, their stories, their ideas reflected in their interactions with one another and with me. They not only heard about the importance of voice, they experienced how it can change their world. The students in my class owned their thinking and their learning, and they could challenge me and one another to interrogate ideas and actions. At home, we read the books and had the talks. I've always been honest with my kids about why the adults they interact with won't always welcome their disagreement, why some of their peers got lots of space while others are punished. We've talked about how race and gender, class and ethnicity shape their interactions with their friends and grown-ups. They haven't always had the right language, like when my then 4-year-old claimed all those who didn't let him play with dolls were a bunch of racists, but they've always had a keen sense of justice, and they're keenly aware of when it's absent. So I'd like to say, there you go. That's the secret recipe. Focus on the kids, make space for their voice in your words and your actions. But I think you can see how inherently flawed that is to have a world full of self-censored adults who are upholding status quo structures and saying to kids, speak up, use your voice. Just be aware that there's an appropriate way to do that, and good luck figuring it all out. The dichotomy of voice and silence became profound for me when my older son came to navigate the difficult terrain of middle school while dealing with the overt racism of one of his peers. He was determined to handle it, to speak up. And as that educator committed to enacting voice, I supported his self-empowerment. We had the talks about what he could say or do, and I comforted him when things were rough. And I thought I was doing it right. But I had missed a few things. First, I didn't see the whole picture. The intentional and sustained string of incidents and how they shaped his daily school experience, I had missed it in part because I hadn't dug deep enough. And so I had also missed how we, the adults in his world, were complicit in creating a context where this could go on for months. I also missed the irony of supporting this beautiful young person while being cautious in the use of my own voice. For so long, I had been seeking to make things palatable for fellow educators, leaving the personal outside, sounding academic and informed, earning my place in that classroom that I didn't believe I belonged in so many years before. As his parents, we eventually stepped in, of course, seeking and advocating for the protection and care of our child. So the ending of the story is a positive one, but the essence isn't so much about taking action or partnering with the school or even engaging young people in dialogue about race. For me, the learning was, how can I continue to support voice in young people, in students, when I don't support it in myself? How can we say, speak up and speak out, when we are contorting what we say and how we sound, footnoting every assertion, and parking our embodied experiences as anecdotal and somehow dismissible? As educators, we do need to examine the voices we hear in our classroom and reflect on the kinds of spaces that we're orchestrating. How does voice come to life in your classroom? What body is that voice housed in? What is the experience and worldview of that body? Which are the voices that we encourage, listen to, and support? And which are the bodies that we silence? And I ask us, in that reflection on the complexity of silenced voices, that we not reduce it to a matter of grit, because it isn't. We need to understand how to truly make space for voice in our classrooms and schools, and help children to guard against the silencing that may try to entangle them. We need to make that silence visible and teach ways to interrupt it within and beyond school. And that's not just in the content of our books and our lessons. It's also in our processes and our interactions. And equally important, we need to use our own voice to challenge oppressive mindsets and practices, to center marginalized experiences, to take risks, to create discomfort, and to know that the eye rolls and the loud sighs, they're not on us. When we speak about an oppression that we know viscerally, that doesn't reduce us as people or as professionals. And we don't need to tone it down or smile as we speak. Now, this is not to make light of the real dangers personally and professionally of using your voice. We have to be strategic, but we also have to be brave. We need to live the value of voice, not just teach it. We have so much power as educators. Our positions, our identities, our status. Can we really expect our students to bring all of themselves into our classrooms, to speak their truths, to use their voices, to disrupt systems that diminish our collective humanity, unless we are willing to do the same? Thank you.